I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the efforts that we're doing to conduct on-farm research, some of the things that we believe kind of as an extension team, and as maybe a few new faculty that are trying to bump up our on-farm research efforts. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, as I get this, a little bit, is that better? You guys still hear me? Yep. Okay, a little bit about some of the conceptual differences between on-station research and on-farm research, right? Because this is something that people talk about a fair amount, and maybe we can just spend a few minutes to think about why we care about on-farm research versus on-station, and what are the pluses and minuses of each. So when we think about on-station research, this is typically, we're talking about university farms, right? So we only really have a few of these in the state in terms of the agronomy work. The field crop work that we do really happens at the Worcester branch, at Western and Northwest. So Wayne County, Clark County, and Wood County is where most of the on-station fertility or agronomic research happens. So there's not that many of those stations, right? And we're typically in these scenarios thinking about small plots. For on-farm, though, really the possibilities are really limitless in terms of where we do that work. We're usually thinking about just a few treatments. We can't run a trial typically with large strips and have 16 or 20 different treatments, because most fields you're not going to be able to even fit it all in, and it's too complex in that regard. So on-farm research, we're usually talking about these large strips, right? So when we think about on-station, that's on university farms, we're talking about some of the advantages. We're quote-unquote trained professionals, so we've got control. We've been on this rodeo before, so we can make our management consistent and have some control. We often have fancy toys on the university farms, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this in a second. But when we think about small plots, why do we like small plots? Why do researchers like small plots? Is it because we're too lazy and don't want to walk 200 feet to collect samples? We just want to walk. What's that?
Control variability.
Control variability. What kind of variability do we control for when we do small plots? Field variability, right? So that's topography, that's change in soil type. It's not uncommon in many parts of the state. Within a field, there might be 2, even 3 different soil types. When we shrink that down, we can think about it in the context of less field variability, however that is defined. Disadvantages, of course, not very many places, right? So we are limited by the research stations we have. That means a limited number of soil types, et cetera, et cetera. This is a fundamental thing. Small plots has lots of edges, lots of borders. It might not be realistic of real-world field conditions, okay? On-farm research, the advantage of this is a lot of different diversity of soil types and management and how those things all interact. Because of that, we can put out, and I'll talk about this in a second in terms of our fertility trials, but rather than having 2 decades of fertilizer work done on 3 farms, we've got a whole bunch of farms that are all doing similar trials. So we just have a lot more robust information that's generated in a very short amount of time. And then this one, in terms of interacting with farmers, as research scientists, we often think, oh, well, we know what's going on. We know exactly what the problem is, what the primary constraints are. If we just figure out this research question, then we can solve the problem. And that's clearly not always the case, ever the case. I don't know. It's rarely the case. And so this idea of having that interaction with growers is very important. Disadvantages, sometimes we lack quality control, right? It's just the reality. We don't know exactly what's going on in all these places. And sometimes farmers do things that we scratch our heads about, but that's just part of the process. and maybe some equipment issues or limitations, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay, going back to why we like small plot research, to reduce variability. And this is a study that came out of Michigan to show just this. These are different years, and we have different crops in those years, and then 3 different size fields. Okay, so we have 5 to 10 acre fields, 2.5 acre fields, and then 0.05 acres, roughly 2,000 square feet. Okay, so this is what we would consider small plot. And what's in the table are standard errors of means. In other words, how much variability that we get within any given treatment mean of the trial. So the treatments aren't particularly important here, but what we see if we average that, we go from 0.73, so it's the amount of variability around grain yield, right? So we go from 0.73 in the large plots to 0.22 to 0.18, and our variability is decreasing. So this is really, this is why we do it, because we want to reduce variability. So why is reducing variability important? That's a good question to ask, right? Why do we care about variability? Why do we want to actually reduce the variability? Better data. So what does that mean? What does better data mean in terms of, we talk about, there was some discussion in another program yesterday about somebody put out a trial and they had a 13 bushel difference between treatment A and treatment B. And the grower or the researcher said, but there's not a statistically significant difference. But then the farmer said, well, 13 bushel means a lot to me, But so the problem is that for statistics and just for the robustness of your data, right? That to get good data, we need low variability, because when we have replicates or averages that are all through the roof, we are limited in what we can actually say about that. All right, and so maybe sometimes that's not that important for you as a farmer, but really from kind of a science perspective, and being able to say that treatment A had an effect, when we reduce variability, we have a much greater capacity to do that. So if we have 3 reps or if we have 10 reps, most on-farm, I don't know any on-farm research that has 10 replications, but if we did 10 replications, we'd have a lot greater statistical power. Our ability to make these comparisons would be greater. All right. So, but farmers, how many folks in the audience are farmers? Okay. So you all tell me, when I am standing up here presenting data, I get the question a lot, was this on farm field or was these on large strips? What kind of plots? So why do people care about that? Why do you all care if it's on small plot research versus large strip? You want to know what's realistic? Okay. So that assumption would be like, maybe what's happening in 4 rows of corn by 40 feet might not be scalable to, say, 40 acres, right? That's a kind of an ongoing question, and we really don't know the answer, and the answer probably is true. It probably depends on what we're measuring and what the experiment is and da-da-da-da, right? But we'd like to be able to scale things up. So, we also think about, well, you might not farm anywhere close to Wood County, Clark County, or Wayne County. So what about stuff that's in my county or my soil type or my environment? So, these are things that kind of detract from this idea, the power of what a small plot would actually do. Okay. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of the fertilizer trials that we're doing in the state now. And this is all in the context of revising fertilizer recs. And as most of you know, these are not particularly new. They're over 20 years old. It's a joint venture between Michigan State, Ohio State, and Purdue. And it really has provided a really nice kind of cornerstone framework in terms of how we think about fertility, how we manage fertilizer and nutrients in field cropping systems. So corn, soybeans, wheat, and alfalfa. So what's happened in 20 years? Who's been farming for over 20 years? Raise your hand. Has anything changed in the last 20 years in farming? Should I ask, has anything not changed in the last 20 years in farming, right? So, of course, things have changed greatly. We think about genetics. We think about how we grow things, spacing, population, tillage operations. The list goes on in terms of what might have changed. I think an important component is this idea of rented ground. There's well over half the acres in all three of these states is rented ground. And the philosophy outlined here, we'll talk about in a second, is this idea of build-up and maintenance. In other words, we want to feed the soil, get it to a reasonable level so we can feed the plants. If we're only farming a field or a set of fields for a short term, 2 years, 1 year, and we're not sure if we're going to be farming it, in 2 or 3 years from now, are we going to want to invest all the money to build up those levels to what the Tri-State recommends? I don't think that doesn't happen, or that's a scenario that happens quite a bit, and we need to kind of conform to the reality of what farmers are facing. And then, of course, water quality and all of the ruckus that's causing and putting the spotlight on agriculture and the industry. So, for the Tri-States, these original documents based on recommending yield goals for corn and wheat, nitrogen recommendations based on yield goals. That is, if I want to grow 180 bushel corn, I apply this much nitrogen. We've moved away from that, and really for corn and have adopted this MRTN model, which is an economic model. Not going to get really into it too much right now, but it's this is something that's a kind of a joint land grant adventure between most folks in the Corn Belt. And then for P&K, it's really this build and maintain approach where as your soil test level drops, your fertilizer rate increases, and then it goes down to 0 as your soil test level increases. Okay, so this is kind of where we're operating from. And to give you just a little bit of an overview, has anyone ever? Does anyone know that we're in the process? Who knew before right now that we're in the process of revising the recommendations? Everybody, man. So this is not news to anybody. All right. Well, that's good to hear. And then we do have folks that are in the audience today that have actively engaged and helped out with that. So we certainly appreciate that. It's your checkoff dollars at work. It's Soybean Council and Corn and Wheat Board. Almost all of this work is being done on farm. And we're working both directly with growers. We're also working with crop consultants, basically contracting or partnering with, whatever you want to call it, to help facilitate trials. So we pay growers to do it. We pay crop consultants to help growers to do it. We're pretty flexible. We try to be very flexible in terms of what we actually ask. So you tell us what crop you want to work on, what nutrients you want to test, and we'll work with you. Okay, this is a bit of like old model, old Tri-State stuff versus where we're going today, and in maybe a larger sense, kind of a shift in terms of how research is done, field research, and how the role of extension in the state. This is a map. We went back. My predecessor, Jay Johnson, who was published these annual reports from 76 to 99, okay? With all the studies of the field, the fertility work that he had done in any given field season went into each one of these reports. We went back and scoured those and found this is just for P&K trials. We found that there was 9 sites in the state of Ohio that fed into, or actually there was work done on phosphorus and potassium, okay? So again, it's a Tri-State document. A lot of that work was done in Michigan and some work in Indiana as well. That all kind of collectively formed to the recommendations. But you might not even be able to tell. I'm sure people in the back can't see this number right here. That number is 98, okay? These are a bunch of 1s, 7, 3, 27, and 15. 85, 90% of the trials that went in for the Ohio portion that went into the Tri-State were from just 3 sites. So is that robust information? Can we do better than that? I think we can, right? For nitrogen, it was a little bit better, but 15 total sites, okay? This is a map of Ohio, if you didn't know. 2015, last 3 years, and we've got different points. Red and blue points are the last 3 years of data that we've done fertilizer trials at, okay, across the state. So, is there corn grown in southwestern Ohio? There shouldn't be. Well, there is. I hate to bust your bubble. Is anyone here from southwest Ohio? Yes, sir. We need more cooperators. This is really just kind of a first come, first served basis. So we've got some more interns down here to help populate some of our southern Ohio numbers. But one thing that I'm opinionated about a number of things. One thing is that we're going to be very transparent with this process and share data with what we find in aggregate form, not on an individual grower basis, but maybe we'll pull it by county or we'll pull it by region or something like that. And so folks can get to see, but we really hope in this next year that we get some more numbers down here to help flesh that out. But so thinking about a new model, or I don't know if it's a new model, but just maybe a little bit different way to think about things moving forward. But I have a fairly cynical view on soil fertility because I deal with it every day. But the reality is that there's always going to be an element of uncertainty when we think about fertilizer recommendations. It'd be great if we could provide really highly precise recs for when you need fertilizer and when you don't. That's just not the reality. The reality is we have different soils. Those interact with how they're managed. And then, of course, this whole fun factor of weather. All that collectively creates a lot of uncertainty, a lot of different scenarios. Sometimes sites are responsive, sometimes they're not. And this whole idea of being very prescriptive, trust me, I'm the expert, this is the actual rate that you need. So we're trying to move a little bit away from that and make it more, give you all the tools that you have to make informed decisions, okay? Because the reality is that there is a fair amount of uncertainty, and I have a doctoral degree that doesn't make me qualified to tell you exactly what's going to happen on your farm, right? I mean, that's your decision. So private-public partnerships, again, this idea of extension, public funds for agriculture and extension continue to shrink. We need to really partner with a lot of really good private entities that are in the state. And I think this is an example, the work that we're doing right now, of a really nice example of that. I'm proud of of the relationships that we're forming and how the work that we're getting done collectively. And more important, I can stand up here and tell you how much fertilizer to apply. Are you going to believe me? Probably not, right? I mean, maybe if you're a sucker, no. But if you work with a crop consultant and you all have a close relationship, whatever that crop consultant is going to say is going to have a lot more weight for you than what I'm going to tell you. And so understanding that when crop consultants are helping generate recommendations, then they're going to buy into those recommendations, right? So, and a lot of talk lately, especially in this conference, but talking about precision technologies, and it's never been easier to conduct fertilizer trials on farm with all the variable rate custom application that's out there. The ability to look at yield maps, even if it's not super scientific, but I'd highly encourage you all to just experiment. We're curious by nature, and just if you're putting out a new thing, leave if you're applying gypsum, if you're applying whatever it might be, do a strip without, do a strip with, a strip without, or even better, do 2 strips without, 2 strips with, or something like that, just to get some idea what's going on. So. What we're doing is for any given farmer, a farmer tells us that they're interested in a crop consultant, we take a pre-fertilization soil sampling. We're doing a number of things with that. Of course, we do a standard soil test. We're also doing some soil health testing. We take an R1 tissue, so some point of, this is corn, but if it's soybean or wheat, we take it right when it goes into that reproductive phase because that's typically when we see deficiencies as a nutrient tool. Then, of course, we're measuring grain and yield and nutrient analysis. And we collect some management information about how that field was managed in the past. So there's really two different types of approaches in the trials that we're doing. We're doing nitrogen differently, and then we're doing everything else, right? So it's nitrogen in one camp and all the other nutrients in another. This is NPK and sulfur with corn, soybeans, and wheat. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. We're unfortunately not touching alfalfa this time. So we might get to that, but not in the next few years. So with corn and wheat, we do multiple rates of nitrogen. That's going to feed into this economic model of maximum return to nitrogen, not trying to maximize productivity, but trying to maximize profitability. That's the big difference. We don't have a model like this for wheat, so we're going to develop one. And then for phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur, it's just a plus or minus. We either apply, it's a fertilized strip and a non-fertilized strip. And we just look for a response. And the idea is that we take that response and we see, look at that for the soil test level and the tissue test. So this again is from that, this is real data that went into the tri-states in Ohio. So this is, you probably can't see anything back there. This is relative yield versus soil test potassium and phosphorus. This red dashed line is our critical level, okay? So that's 100 part per million of potassium, 15 part per million of brave phosphorus, all right? So basically, when it's above this level, we don't see any yield difference. This is the black line's 100. But when these soil test values start creeping down, yield starts dropping. So this is really, this is the basis of what tri-states were formed on. And it's incredibly clean when it comes from just 3 sites. Our data will not be this clean, I'm sure of it, because it's a messy world, right? 2015, we started in 14 with just soybeans, and then corn and soybeans in 2015. This last year was incredible in terms of the turnout. A lot of people interested. We expanded to do some late season. We have nitrogen rate, some starter, and some late season as well. And so last year alone, or I don't know if it's this year, last year, 2016, 92 trials. We've got over 151 trials right now that we've conducted, so good numbers. And we're going to do it one last year. So this last year is really the only time, the last year that we have identified funding for these trials. So if you are interested, now is your chance to get involved. Our top priority is really making these numbers of P and K in corn, soybeans, and wheat. Our second priority is trying to get some better information on sulfur and starter phosphorus. This is a perennial, question that growers have. Can we reduce our broadcast applications with some starter P, or can we regardless of what my soil test phosphorus levels, I can't grow corn without starter. I mean, I hear that sometimes. Late season N or nitrogen rate trials in corn and wheat are also possibilities. So the idea is we really hope to continue this as a 3-stage document. There's still some things that need to be worked out at this point. We are intending to have this as more of a living document than just the PDF that gets published once every 20 some odd years. And hopefully by sometime in 2018 we're going to come out with some new racks. So there's a lot of details in there, but I want to talk just real briefly to wrap up. A couple more slides. What are we doing at Ohio State and OSU Extension to build capacity for on-farm research? So has anyone seen this new app that's out? Has anyone got it on their smartphone right now? Anyone? All right, well, it's a free download. John Fulton, Kaylee Port spent a lot of time developing this, It's a really nice app that's strictly intended to help facilitate on-farm research. So you can track, you can take field notes, track your data. It does statistics for you. If you are into these sorts of things, it's a nice thing to, a nice tool that's out there. Okay. We also have a program that we've started a couple years ago that we call the ACRE program. It's an internship opportunity that several folks have participated here. The idea is to take undergrad students that are interested in agronomy and soil science and entomology and everything and put them in OSU county educator offices. So put them in local counties across the state. We've had 7 or 8 the last 2 years. We're going to have 7 or 8 this year. And they are really key in terms of helping facilitate on-farm research. So they go out to growers' fields and they sample soil or leaf tissue or whatever the trial might be. Here's our, for the bean counters out there, here's our, what we've got from last year, 15 projects, 66 county-based field trials that they supported, these interns. So there's just about 8 of them. 32,000 acres scouted. They do a lot of scouting. And then over 600 farms that they visited. So it's just this idea that how can we as Extension, really continue to try to serve clientele and facilitating on-farm research, in our view, is a primary mechanism for that, for fulfilling that mission. If you are interested, you can email me or you can go to this link. There's more information, go.osu.edu. FERT-trials will tell you all about it. You can sign up there. You can. It's just the PDF that gives you more information.